Hi there, my name's Ben Williams and I'm going to talk to you about Claude Desktop. It comes with three modes: Chat, Cowork and Code. I'm going to explain when to use one, over the other. We'll actually be going from conversation through to creation. So yeah, on the left hand side, this is maybe, where you're starting off or where you are at the moment. You might have played around with ChatGPT or Claude, but still predominantly most of your work is, manual. You're scheduling meetings, you're scheduling tasks, you're managing your team, managing the projects. There's planning activities, both, short-term, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and, you're generating reports, you're kind of repeating processes, over and over again. You're getting snowed under, there's a better way. Your inbox is just, kind of chaotic, and yeah, the research you're doing, you're having problems finding out, what you've researched. You remember something, but you can't get hold of it. So the idea is, within Claude, Claude itself can act as your executive assistant. Yeah. It kind of takes away the pain from you. So you focus on your business rather than working in your business. So it's kind of, running operations, tracking your team and the projects they're working on. It'll do the research for you. This enables you, frees up time for you. So as you can focus more on, strategic work. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the three modes of Claude Desktop are Chat, Cowork, and Code. So Chat, like ChatGPT, you're going back and forth with Claude, asking questions. You may be brainstorming, drafting emails, uploading documents, analyzing documents. Then with Cowork, it's more autonomous. You define a task, you can kind of walk away. It goes off and does its thing. It actually does plans and it actually delivers as well. In Claude Code, yeah, what you do with it is really unlimited. So behind the scenes, there's an AI programmer, and that helps you build applications, fix bugs, and deploy to production. But you don't have to be a coder to work with it, because it is very much conversational. And nor do you need to create apps. You may be creating, proposals, reports. It may be, scraping your Google Analytics or your, financial data. Okay, so we'll have a look at how we go about downloading Claude. So I've gone to this website, it's, the Claude website with the download URL, and then you just got to go and choose, yeah, your platform. So myself, I'm working off Windows, so I click download. I go off and install that and follow the prompts. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, there are a few different flavors of the Claude Desktop. You can have it on your laptop or your desktop, but also on your, your mobile phone. And they've got a fairly recent feature, maybe about, 2 months of speaking, that the mobile really works well with the desktop. You can fire off commands from your mobile and it performs or executes tasks on your computer or your server. So with Claude Cowork, yeah, it's able to integrate, with applications, and we'll have a look at some of those demonstrations. Claude Code can be used in Claude Desktop, and we'll see that at the end of this video. It can also be used in different IDEs, so that could be Cursor, it could be Google Anti-Gravity, or Visual Studio Code. During the installation process, you're going to need to select a plan. So you've really got three plans to choose from. You've got the free plan, but that just limits you to just the chat, experience. Then you've got the pro plan. This is one I would recommend to get started. This allows you to use both Claude Code and Claude Cowork. I would perhaps start off on the monthly plan, $20 per month. Don't commit to the annual plan, initially. You're able to access research and do a number of other things. Then what we've got then is the max plan. It does seem, quite expensive at $100. It also has another option which you get 4 times the credits, and that's $200. But the reality of it, you've got to kind of see when you get to this level that, Claude is really, it's a bit like a digital, employee, able to do many things. So $100 a month, it's not really that expensive for what you get, provided you're able to, use it effectively. Okay, so we'll have a look at Claude Chat first of all. And yeah, as I mentioned, you're pretty much going back and forth, in conversation, just yourself, and Claude talking. And there are many, examples of why you may want to do that, so just chatting, brainstorming, as if you're brainstorming, with a colleague, trying to, get out ideas. You may want to draft up an email, get the tone right, or it might be, generate a proposal, come up with a strategy, or you may be wanting to analyze, compare options. You could be uploading multiple documents and then kind of reason through the problems. We could generate images, understand images. If we're seeing there's an error or we're unsure, we can upload a screenshot, for example. Yeah, it could be a complicated or, a very lengthy, legal document. You could upload the attachment and start to ask questions, about it. Other things we can do is kind of upload transcripts or meetings that we may have had with our colleagues or with a client. And from there, we can actually generate action items. So how do you go about doing it? A lot of you will have already got experience chatting with, ChatGPT or the like, but you would say, yeah, explain the pros and cons of these two pricing approaches. Yeah, review this screenshot and tell me what's wrong with it. It'll help you get to the next stage. So if you don't know, yeah, just ask Claude and see what it comes back with. And up Claude Desktop, and as we can see, there's a chat option, a co-work option, and a code option. Now, what we see on the left-hand side is, we can have new chats. We can search on existing chats. Yeah, so there are projects, and within your projects, you can upload a number of documents. You can group sort of chats together and yeah, just work in a bit more of an organized manner. Artifacts are kind of the deliverables or the documents that get generated. You can star or pin conversations that are important to you, and then you've got your recent chat history. So if I go in here and just type in a chat, if I said help me prepare for a Claude Desktop demo. So nothing new here. Claude goes off, it talks to its LLM, its large language model, does its research and comes back with, some information. So what we have down the bottom then is the models. These are the LLMs or the brains, if you like. Now, by default, I've got the Opus 4.6 model selected. So this is more capable than other models, but, it can overthink. So you've got to try and work out, which model to use in different situations. So if you're on the Pro plan, I would just start off with the 4.6 model. It's really there for everyday tasks. It's not consuming as many credits as 4.6. I think Opus 4.6 is roughly, 60%, 67% more. All right, if I select the plus, what we see is we can add files, or photos to the chat, ask questions about it. We can add to a project, so add this chat and different other chats to a project. It's integrated for me, currently integrated with Google Drive and GitHub. And then we'll talk a bit more about skills and connectors when we get to Cowork. But, the idea there is that, if you've got a repetitive task, which is a useful thing to do, again and again, you can create a skill for it. For me, it's a bit like a standard operating procedure. And then you've got your connectors. You can, integrate with a number of applications. You can then perform research, yeah, and we can actually have different kind of styles or tones. Okay, next we're going to look at Cowork. So in Cowork, here are a few examples, what you can do with it. So some example prompts are you may want to research, 15 competitors and produce a comparison spreadsheet. You may want to, pull information from your Slack messages or your team messages. So that's an example of, integrating, with app. You can review contract flag issues in the Word document, so behind the scenes. It can access your files, on your hard drive. It can read them. It can create new files. You can integrate it within your browser, so it controls Chrome to research websites. A couple more examples of app integrations. It can integrate with Airtable and workflow systems like NA10 or Make. And the demo I'll be showing you is accessing Airtable. It can produce professional documents, and it can also schedule reoccurring tasks. It can also execute tasks in parallel. So if we look at I guess the components of Cowork, we've got the connectors. As I mentioned, that's the ability to connect to your application. So, connect to Airtable, connect to Gmail, connect to Teams. So the idea is that you don't have to go into those third-party systems to perform a task. You can actually do it within Claude. And I think until you start using it, you may be thinking, why do you want to do it? Really, for me, you just want to be in one place doing as many things as you can. It kind of, reduces the context sort of switching, and you're able to get information from multiple systems and do your analysis. Skills then, like an example would be, if we look at a standard operating procedure, you can wrap that up around a prompt or a Claude skill. And then what we can do is kind of save that skill away, and then on a later date we can execute that skill, and it will do the same thing over and over again, and just kind of streamline the process. You can create your own skills. You can store the skills. They're really just reusable task templates. An example, as I mentioned before, is that you can generate client proposals. The plugins then are more industry specific, and they can be say finance orientated or marketing orientated, legal, enterprise search, etc. So they're pre-built workflows that are built within Claude Cowork, and we can have a bit of a look at them. So the Cowork demo I'm going to show you is chatting through the Cowork interface using Airtable. The database is a voice agent database. It's for a holiday park, and they take bookings through a voice agent, and we can be asking questions and finding out what's occurred. We can view how many calls happened last week, or the call classification. All right, we're just going to jump back to Claude Cowork, and I'll ask it some questions around top of the town. Okay, we have an Airtable base, and in there are calls for the accommodation park called Top of the Town. And what I'd like to know is how many calls there have been in the last week. How many calls did the voice agent take? All right, so on that. Okay, so I can see it's already starting to search Airtable, but it's asking, can I authorize this? So I select yes. Okay, so it's returned the results. That took maybe about a minute, and what I can see is it's come back and said, okay, Top of the Town, the Airtable database between the 5th and 12th of April 2026. It's taken 99 calls. It's actually gone and classified the calls, because that's how we have the segmentation, in the database. It's telling us a little bit more about, okay, there were 2 emergency, calls, number of substantive calls. Okay, what do you want me to do with, this information? So what I might say is, okay, what I'd like you to do is, draw me a bar chart graph, and in particular, just rule out the quick hang-ups, and I want to look back over a longer period of time. So I want to look back for all calls it's in 2026, so that's just over 3 months. Okay, that took about another minute to run, and as we can see, there are almost 1,200 calls in 2026 over the past 3 months. And there is a link there to view the chart. So if I click on this chart, what we can see is all the calls. Make it a little bit bigger. So we've got to think about what's going on here. We've got voice agent software, Trilid, taking the calls. It communicates with customers. It interfaces with a booking system. It then writes the information to an Airtable database. And then from Claude, I can just start chatting away, via Cowork, to the data that's in that table. And I can see, all the different calls here and how they're segmented. So what I'm going to do now is if I click close there, just want to show you on the right hand side what's going on behind the scenes. We talked about what Cowork does for you. It progresses the task, it plans, it implements it, but it also writes files, to your local system or to your hard drive, and that is not possible, nor is it the intent when you're using Claude Chat. So if I hover over or look at this, you can see where these files have been, written to. Equally, you can read files as well. What was the busiest day, and also what is the busiest period, which is the peak hour when most calls are received? All right, so if we look at the results, we can see the busiest day was middle of March, 16th of March, with 27 calls. And then the peak hour is 9 to 10 a.m. Okay, and we can see, calls do happen quite early from 7 a.m. and then they, die off after, 7 p.m. So even though the office hours are up till 5 p.m., the voice agent is taking calls throughout the office hours, but also after hours as well. Okay, so what did Claude Code found? Yeah, it just worked out how many calls there were. The average number of calls. It looked at the intent. Were they bookings? Were they supplier? Were they customer calls? We were able to draw a graph. And again, it's not just Airtable. You can do this with many, applications. Not all applications. So I've shown you Cowork in action, integrating with applications, but now I'll show you how to kind of, configure it. So if you select the plus button down in the chat session, you'll see a few things. You'll see, skills, connectors, and plugins. So the connectors is where we just saw it was integrated with Airtable. There are many connectors, so you can integrate with Gmail. I could ask, okay, what are my most recent emails, or which emails have I had in the last week that I haven't responded to? What are urgent? What require, follow up? I can ask questions about my calendar. How many meetings do I have tomorrow? Which are my urgent meetings? And then likewise with, Make or N8N, you can kind of connect to those workflow systems as well. You can actually go and create a workflow using Cowork. It creates the full blueprint, and you can actually upload it, into make.com or an N8N for that matter. And pretty much, what's going on behind the scenes then is that, it understands, the functionality of Make. Likewise, it understands the functionality of Airtable to, retrieve and sort of, create records. So that's the connection, So now if we go to the skills then, and, these are the skills that I've got, but you can, if I select manage skills now, okay, so these are the different kind of, skills that I've got, but you can go and create a new skill. You can even choose existing skills that come, with Claude, or you can get them off the marketplace. So if I click on skills, you can see here there are a number of different, skills that you can use. Coming back to the connectors, so you saw, Gmail, Make, Airtable. There are a lot of applications, that you can integrate with, Monday.com, your databases, your Stripe, software related for managing your projects and deployment, like, for sale and so forth. Okay, and then you can actually go, a step further where you've got the plugins, and they're even a bit more kind of robust. So what you can see, they're actually plugins for legal, for finance, and customer support as well. Yeah, so for me, if I'm just sort of going back to the connectors and the skills, yeah, connectors, you're connecting, to your applications, and then the skills, they're really like, sometimes you may just want to think of them as standard operating procedures, and behind the scenes there is a prompt, and then that may execute code as well. So yeah, just experiment, have a go with some of the out of the box skills, and also see if you can go and create them. We will be covering the creation of skills a bit more in the in future courses. So just finalizing really on Cowork. If you like, it's the middle ground between chat and code. You're kind of getting into the semi sort of technical space, and Claude are wanting to bring people along the ecosystem all the way. For some, it does seem like a bit of a big jump from chat to Cowork, so chat to code, and that's kind of, I believe, one of the reasons they've introduced Cowork. And next we'll look at Claude Code, where there is kind of no limit. We will be initially looking at Claude Code in the desktop, and then a future video we'll look at it in an IDE, which you have a richer experience. So yeah, just going back to what Claude Code is, yeah, it's like having a programmer sat next to you and you're asking them to do tasks. You don't need to know the technical syntax. It goes off and does it for you. So I guess the word code would maybe sort of push quite a few people away. You are coding, but you're doing it in a conversational way. You don't need to know the syntax. Okay, so don't be afraid of it. Experiment with it, and you will learn pretty quickly. If you don't understand something, just ask Claude to explain it to you. Okay, now we're going to use Claude Code in Claude Desktop to go create a landing page. So the landing page will be for voice agents targeting plumbers. Okay, but before we get into that, I want to show you what's in the chat interface. So again, I'm on Claude Code. What we've got down here is a folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a folder, choose a different folder, and I will use that one. Okay, so I select the folder. Okay, so what we've got here then is all the files that gets created will be stored in this folder. So as I said before, Cowork and Code, we can store files locally, but chat we cannot here. And then what we've got is we've got this local repository, and in the next video we'll talk a bit more about version control and GitHub integration. Get a little technical there just on the code base. So what we've got here then is this plus. We've got the connectors again, we've got slash commands, but for now we're not going to worry too much about that. We're going to type away, and what's going to happen is that we are coding, but we're actually doing all of that in English. We're just speaking to it. Our words then are getting passed to AI. It talks to the large language model. It uses its intelligence. It's like using a programmer, and then the program comes back and it does its thing, and you go back and forth. Okay. Now we'll look at Claude Code within Claude Desktop. Before we actually go into the interface, we'll just go through a little bit of the theory. Okay, so even though it's got the word code, don't be daunted by that. You can create not just applications, but you can create procedures, skills, I guess all different kind of processes to help you you run your business. It doesn't have to be software related. Okay, so within Claude Code, we'll have a look at what we can do. So we can, as I say, create these applications. We can run activities in parallel. Our work can be integrated into version control. So a lot of this is sounding quite technical, but what we're going to be doing in this example is just creating a landing page. For, in this case, it's going to be a voice agent, and working in the plumbing industry sector. Okay, so how are we going to do that? We're going to create a prompt, and the prompt is going to be very basic. It's going to say, create a landing page to sell voice agents to tradies and plumbers. Okay, from there, what's going to happen is that it's then going to communicate with the large language model, and it's going to perform a number of tasks. We may want to come back and refine what gets produced. and then we kind of go and deploy it, and associated with our website. When you're going through this process, you've got the opportunity to choose different models. And so Sonnet 4.6 is the everyday model. It's very fast, it's very capable. It's great for analysis, drafting, and so forth. It doesn't use quite as many credits, okay? And this is typically where you start off. Then Opus 4.6 is more capable, has more reasoning power, and it's best for complex coding tasks. Okay, it does use more credits. So the example I'm going to do now is not a complicated coding task, so you probably would choose Sonnet 4.6. So we'll go back to Claude Code, and as I say, this is Claude Code within Claude Desktop. We'll have a look at the interface. So this is where we type in the prompt. This is where we say, all right, create a landing page. This is for voice agents in the plumbing business. Okay, so we'll have a look at the Claude Code interface in Claude Desktop. So we'll start off with the prompt is create a landing page to sell voice agents to tradies and plumbers. Okay, before I run the command, I'm just going to show you, I guess, a few other options here. We've got select folder. So this is where all the files get stored. And as I mentioned, Cowork and Code, they store the files locally as opposed to your chats. So I'm going to select folder, and then I'm going to choose a folder. Okay, so I've got temp demo Claude Code. So I select that folder. Now, what we've got here, we talked about the different models. I've got Opus 4.6. As I said, we can choose 4.6 or a lower costing, model. And then down here, we've got where we can store it and handle version control. I'll come on to, Git repositories in a second. So we've got this kind of is really a security measure. So you can tell Claude to just go and just do everything, or you can say, no, I want to be notified each time an edit gets made, or it requires permissions. So I'm just going to select enter now. So it's asking me to trust the workspace, okay, because it's doing, I guess, tasks that will be writing information, to my machine, locally. All right, we'll have a look at what it's produced and some of the things it's trying to solve. So it's explaining how it works, what the pain points are, after hours, tire kickers, the reception cost, and so forth. I can see the quite dark colors, not my sort of cup of tea. But let's have a look at what it's produced and take it from there. So we've got these sections. How it works, features, pricing, and sort of questions. So look, I won't go through it too much because what I want to do is show you the iterative process. So if I go back to Claude Code now, so I can basically request some changes. So I may say, oh, look, functionally I think you have everything there, but I would actually like to have separate pages rather than the one long page. Also your colors, they're just too dark, too bold, and with the animation, it's just a bit too busy, so reduce the animation. So you go back and forth, with Claude Code until you're happy with what it produces. So I'll click enter and I'll pause the video again for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. All right, it's finished running now, so we'll have a look at what it's produced. Okay, so here's the home page. So the focus here is, for tradies and plumbers to stop missing jobs, for the voice agent to, take their calls. So we got some, metrics, explain what the ROI will be and who it's sort of targeted for, the different kind of, tradies, including plumbers. What their call to action is, give it a go for a fortnight, explains, how it works, set it up, but you've got it starts ringing. If you don't answer it, it then kicks off into the voice agent. It has a conversation, and it makes a booking with an existing or a new client, and yeah, it just sort of takes you through the steps. So step one, plug in your number, tell us your trade, tell us a bit about your business, and then yeah, just get back to work. It's all kind of set up. And yeah, if you want to check out the Trillit platform, they're very good in streamlining this process. So this is the features. It sort of describes what functionality the voice agent has. We can also have voice agents sort of transferring calls in when there's an emergency. So it can be used for lead qualification, emergencies. You can follow up with SMS. If you've got multiple people working in your team or your company, you can look at multiple calendars. Obviously different costs will be associated with the complexity, and then it's a bit of an add-on sell if you want to integrate with other platforms. Here are some of the common ones, really. So you could create a LinkedIn post, have your call to action, takes them to this landing page, and from there you get some bookings. What we could do is go extend this further, where you've got book demo. Maybe it's book a discovery call through Calendly or cal.com. So pricing then, it's kind of made these numbers up randomly, but three-tiered pricing. We can start a trial. They can jump out if they're not happy after 2 weeks. And then you've got, well, this one is 100 calls included, this one's unlimited, and so forth. Yeah, so basically breaking down the functionality on the product that you choose. And then we got some questions and answers as well. Okay, so what you can see then in Claude Code, I'll go back. That's pretty impressive. It was really 2 prompts going back and forth, and it's generated something quite powerful. That's the landing page. I do have a couple of plugins that aid, I guess, how it produces that. It makes it more aesthetically pleasing, but you will and you can get a landing page just from that single prompt for sure. Okay, so we looked at chat, we looked at Cowork, and now we looked at code. We did all that within Claude Desktop. And what I'm going to take you to now then is something called GitHub. Just going to touch on this briefly. The next video I'll talk to you a bit more in detail. But when you're working with Claude Code, we saw that a number of project files get created. Now we want to back up those files. It's a bit like Google Drive or OneDrive or SharePoint. But it's really for, I guess, or what gets generated, the code, and that gets pushed to the cloud. It tracks every change. So what happens is when you develop something, whether it's an application or it's just there to run your business, you're able to roll back to a previous version if something has gone wrong. So just see it as a more sophisticated version than Google Drive or OneDrive, just for version control. It's not a document management system, so it falls down on that. But for managing your Claude Code projects, it's excellent. And yeah, there's nothing else that you really want to be considering. Yeah, so we looked at chat, we looked at Cowork, and we looked at code. These technical skills increase as you go from left to right. But even when you've got the skills at the code level, you still will be using chat and Cowork. I predominantly use chat and code, and not so much Cowork. That's not to say I won't in the future. So what we've covered then, we looked at Claude Desktop. We downloaded it. We looked at the 3 different plans. There was the free one, the Pro plan, and the Max plan. Recommendations to go with the Pro plan initially. That's $20 per month, or $17 per month if you commit for the 12 months. I probably recommend just going for the monthly plan initially. And then we explored how Claude Chat works, Cowork and Code. We connected up Airtable. So with Airtable, we were able to talk to our voice agents. That was the top of the town scenario, and we were able to look at their calls. We could draw graphs and do all that directly within Claude. We then, moved from Cowork to Code, and we built a landing page, from a single prompt. But I did go back and forth a little bit, and as you saw that, and then from there we talked about GitHub, for version control. Just touched on that very, very lightly. So the next video going to be showing you how you can use Claude Code with a different IDE. The ones I'll be presenting is Visual Studio Code, Cursor, Google Anti-Gravity, and making a decision over one of them. So the advantage of using one of those IDEs over Claude Desktop, you have a lot more control. Your information, or more so your files, become a lot more, organized. It looks more like a coding environment. So at first glance, you might, be a little scared of it, but you'll actually find it's a lot easier to use than, Claude Code within Claude Desktop. We will set up GitHub for version control, and then we will, the subsequent videos, we will look to, deploy your first project.